Before you click off this video, I swear to God this is not going to be just me regurgitating the same things I said for the other boss ranking, even though most of it will be. In case you don't know, Radiant mode is literally just one hit from anything equates to you getting completely and utterly nuked off the face of the earth. And some of the bosses are upped in difficulty as a result of this, or their arena or new mechanics in the fight. Anyways, here's the Hollow Knight bosses rank 2.0, but this time it features you getting one shot. It takes a genius to comprehend the sheer levels of stupidity one must go to run headfirst into a guy who can swing their sword fast enough to keep them at bay for about 10 seconds roughly, and still not even be phased nor change their tactics as a result. This miserable cucumber is still a complete and utter joke if you at least have some common sense to maybe jump and down strike if you mistime your spam clicking. It should always be noted that just because you look intimidating as hell does not mean you actually are if you don't know how to fight properly. The funny thing is, in Radiant mode, the highest potential threat is the falling rocks, because if you're too busy trying to fire a Shade Soul from across the room while he's busy jamming out to some rock music, there may very well be a rock slowly descending onto your skull. But since you're probably not paying attention like the absolute buffoon you are, then you'll somehow manage to get hit by these. 2 words, Shadow Dash. Any burgers this guy throws down at you can be dodged simply by just hitting whatever button you need to dash. The only danger in this fight is somehow if you mistime your dash or if you accidentally jump straight into him. Outside of that though, Elder Hu is still the easiest dream fighter by a long shot. The Crystal Guardian can still be countered by the grade A strategy of hitting the directional buttons to avoid all the random disco lasers he shoots out. The only wrench in the works is when the lasers decide to shoot down in a really awkward position, and since you're too busy dodging that, you don't notice that he's currently charging up his Carbonizer MK16 and he blasts you in the face. So Hornet over here is still trying to figure out why you're doing this to yourself, but to keep you motivated, she lets you just annihilate her essentially. Honestly, the only thing that makes Hornet difficult is what I like to call the unpredictable, but it's actually predictable and I'm just bad at the game, leap of death, where she proceeds to jump 5 feet in the air and you really don't know what she wants to do or where she wants to go. You'll see this as a trend with multiple other bosses actually, so be prepared for me to repeatedly say this until your ears bleed if they haven't already started doing so. The Soul Warrior remains in basically the same position as last time, but this time he's got access to these annoying as all living hell ghosts, which bumps him up ever so slightly. Depending on where these things spawn, they can either be an issue or they can decide to spawn right on top of you and say, welp, it's time to die. Anyways, have fun killing this boss with relative ease. The Soul Master still tries to prove he can stand up for his name, and then he gets wall up faster than you can even speak. The only hard move to dodge is his homing Dragon Ball still, because these things boomerang backwards. And if you aren't paying attention to the screen, they're going to ram into you. During his second phase, dodging should be your top priority, of course. But with Quick Slash and Strength or Shaman Stone Abyss Shriek spam on your side, you can usually kill him before he even keeps, giving himself head trauma or whatever. The Broken Vessel drastically decreased in difficulty for this ranking just because of how slow he actually is with all his windups. Outside of his leap of death, but it's predictable and I'm just bad. Defender's Crest is also very useful for helping deal with all those balloons that spawn everywhere. And like the Soul Warrior, these things can sometimes decide to spawn right on top of you, and you can't do anything about it. Outside of that though, the safest way to go about his headbanging is just spamming Descending Dark, or just going to one side of the arena, because unlike his previous self, you can't just face tank him. Truth be told, if you know what Descending Dark or Desolate Dive is, this guy on Radiant is still a joke. The only reason I put him up this high is because the ricochet physics can sometimes decide to screw you over, but outside of that, every time he goes into the ground, you still can just spam that spell and he'll pop out staggered, which nullifies a lot of the potential danger in this fight. The Mantis Lords remain in the exact same spot because this fight has some of the most telegraphed moves on the entire planet. Honestly, the real threat here is you accidentally shish kebabbing yourself into the spikes on either side of the middle area, or getting yourself into a position on the very edge and a Mantis Lord legit jumps on top of you because they go over there to wind up their horizontal charge. I wanted so badly to put Fluke Marm higher on this list. The reason for this is because the barking dogs who think you're their chew toy sometimes have a health boost, and can't be one-shot even with a fully upgraded nail and strength. The key to victory here is to gather as much soul as possible before these things start flying out, and then just start spamming Abyss Shrieks, because the only way you can somehow miss the stationary object in the middle of the room is if you're just that bad. Like the Crystal Guardian, the Enraged Guardian is only difficult because his lasers are sometimes very awkward. So it's really just best to Descending Dark every time he screams into the air like a banshee. You've also got to be careful for the Leap of Death, because if you're in the air and he decides to jump towards you, then you better have the reaction time of a god in order to Shadow Dash through that. I find Steady Body pretty useful here because the recoil of hitting him during the scream attack more often than not makes you backpedal straight into a giant laser. The King of Fortnight did move up a little bit on this list because his pencils can sometimes be the most uncomfortable things ever. You can usually get in a couple hits or a nail art after each attack, but if you accidentally mistime it, you're probably going to go straight into either him or one of the pencils floating your way. It'll require more patience than fighting him normally, of course, because now there are 3 platforms, so just take your time. I've been told that the Collector on Radiant used to be one of the hardest bosses in the game. The reason for this is because you couldn't one-shot the minions since they had a health boost. And I can clearly see why, because if you can't one-shot the Primal Aspids, aka the true bosses of Hollow Knight, you may as well curl up into a ball and start crying because you will never ever be able to get them out of your head as they proceed to torture you. However, as long as you kill the minions as soon as they appear, it'll mostly be fine. His jumping can be pretty erratic though, and sometimes one jar can spawn on one side of the arena, while another spawns on the complete opposite side. So you better pray to God that the one on the other side isn't a Primal Aspid. I don't have to rate the Brooding Moloch as high anymore because with upgrades the Moloch is a lot easier. The middle platform being removed doesn't really change a whole lot, but it does make his movement a lot more erratic. And if he pushes you into a corner, you're probably going to get by his Claw Slash or Goo without Shadow Dashing through him or using Descending Dark's invincibility. The everything in that area will die attack is actually one of the best opportunities to sink in damage because if timed correctly you can just dash as soon as they're about to land. It's safer to just jump and down strike over to the other side though and still do relatively the same amount of damage with a lot less risk. Like the Moloch, the middle platform is indeed gone. But while that removes your camping location, Noth's only move you should be afraid of is the times when he goes into the middle of the arena and starts having a seizure. You can either Descending Dark through this or YOLO it and try dodging it. And trust me, that's a lot harder than it sounds, because it looks like the glob is going to go over you, but then it lands on top of you. You can also just Abyss Shriek him in the ceiling, so as soon as he does that, feel free to just start spamming, and honestly, he might be dead as a result of that. I used Weaverlings in this fight just because he does spend a lot of time on the ground and running past you, so that helps in getting in damage when you really couldn't otherwise. It's pretty counterproductive to fight Gru's mother in such an enclosed area without taking damage and only 3 platforms to maneuver around, when her entire body takes up about 1/6 of the arena. It's actually kind of funny how much more annoying it is to deal with the Gru's mother without the option of face tanking her. Your best bet at dealing damage is by spamming spells, upstriking, or equipping Steady Body and doing everything. Actually, I just listed everything, essentially. You want to be careful when to hit, though, because she'll occasionally decide to charge towards you and headbutt, and if you're close enough to her, this can pretty much go off instantly, so have fun with that one. It may seem surprising that Grim is a lot lower than before, but that's mostly because he is kind of similar to the Mantis Lords, in that all his attacks are very well telegraphed, and the only real attack you may struggle to dodge is the flame spawning attack, depending on how how those come out, you can either be dodging non-stop or basically wait 3 seconds before you have to pay attention to the game. That is easier said than done though, and it still requires at least a good dodging rhythm in order to dance with Grim, but he definitely moves down when it comes to Radiant. Umu is probably the first super RNG boss thus far. This fight can either go by relatively easily, or it can be one of the most painful experiences you've ever had in a video game. This is because the fight in the God Home is not done with Quirrell, but you have to smack Jellyfish into his shield instead. And this is way more annoying than just doing it with Quirrell, because they'll somehow manage to get stuck on a platform or something, or just straight up misfire and run straight into you. And then there's the occasional time when they'll spawn on the complete opposite side of where you are while the arena is currently flashing repeatedly. Depending on where and when these things spawn and Umu's position is really what decides how this fight will go for you. The only real way to collect soul efficiently is by dream nailing stuff, since the Dream Wielder charm for that gives you enough soul for 2 spells and goes off in about 1 second, and Umu is pretty easy to hit with the Dream Nail actually. Jumping across the 3 platforms during Zero's fight takes a decent while to get used to, and it limits your chance to hit the boss even further. Usually, it's best to just strike him after every time he throws a sword at you, but depending on where he decides to fly during that moment, you might just ram straight into him, ultimately leading to your death. His second phase isn't that much harder than his first, but the swords are faster, which can be more annoying. Winged Nosk is up this high on the list because you're basically limited to only being able to hit him when he flies towards you, or using a Shade Soul before he goes upward. His infected balloons aren't that bad, but for some reason, sometimes one will spawn, but the other won't decide to spawn until he gets back from using the bathroom, and by then you forgot he even spawned the other one in to begin with. The 2 real threats are the seizure and going into the roof attack, since it's completely random, and you have very little opportunity to actually react to this, making Descending Dark's invincibility a pretty good way to go about dodging it. The Traitor Lord got a pretty big drop, because really what made the Traitor Lord tougher than some of the other bosses in the vanilla game is it was probably one of, if not the first boss you ever encountered to deal double damage with multiple attacks. When you take that away and just make it one shot for all bosses, he becomes a lot easier due to his very clear telegraphs during this fight. I will admit it takes some good reaction time, and it will still take some getting used to his relentless aggression. But in the end, he doesn't make it quite as high this time. The Vengefly King got tired of Winged Nosk's title of the harder Vengefly King, and called his twin brother, who he didn't even realize existed for basically his whole life. And now the fight is much more annoying because there is in fact 2 of them if you are good at simple addition, or just counting things on the screen. More often than not, one of them will scream and start violently shaking the camera, while the other is busy diving downward to take a bite of your unsuspecting behind. But you can barely make out that it is indeed an incoming threat, because that is how much the camera is shaking. It doesn't help that you now need to put your attention in 2 or more spots, and you're limited to hitting them when they swoop downward or just blindly firing a Shade Soul. The little mosquitoes that spawn in are so tiny to the point where you'll probably not even notice them until you die. You proceed to say, "Excuse me, but what the heck" out loud, and then you notice them sitting right on top of you as the death animation plays. No Eyes still remains a big test of your patience, but she does get bumped up a few spots thanks to her new arena, now featuring you accidentally jumping into about 50,000 thorns repeatedly. Due to the new arena traversing, it is a lot harder than before, so you have to still pick your times of being offensive carefully. The strategy of killing the beast first still remains the top priority because the rider takes eons to even find the motivation to launch herself towards you. When he decides to use his spin dash though, the rider can screw you over if she also is about to land where you're trying to go. The spitting attack is very similar to that of Nosk, since without using Descending Dark you have barely any time to actually react accordingly to it. but this can be nullified by just camping a high spot on the wall. The only reason Marmu is up this high is because the ricochet physics decide to demonstrate the greatest you have ever witnessed in your whole life. It doesn't help that the arena is also smaller and lined with spikes, meaning Marmu has a much easier time just bouncing wherever the hell they want. Really, pray to God the ricochet physics don't decide to make up their own rules, is essentially my advice here. The Hive Knight is still a pretty fair duel all around, but you better pray to God when he vomits his children into the sky, because the pressure of not walking into one of them and being insta-killed often leads to you doing exactly that. The spiky balls are also a pain to dodge, because he might decide to just literally jump on top of you while you're putting your attention on dodging needles. Luckily for both these moves, Descending Dark helps a lot, so after that all you really need to get used to is his lunge and lash attacks. Picasso doesn't feel like he should be this high on the list, but the one move that can be your kryptonite in your fight is the blue paint attack. Because you'll go in to hit him a couple times before he backsteps, and then he'll just decide to rush back to where you were because he forgot to slap you real quick with that oversized paintbrush and paint all over your pathetic corpse. The purple attack can also be annoying since he may decide to use a move while purple paint is still falling, which in turn leads to you just stopping your brain from working and running face first into one of his attacks. Anyways, Leonardo da Vinci isn't that bad on Radiant mode compared to some of the other fights to come. I've never not struggled with fighting Galleon, and I'm not even sure why. It might have to do with his movement being pretty erratic at times, which basically applies to every dream boss not named Elderhu, and his Beyblades act like a toned down version of Marmu in that they are easier to predict, but if you go into a corner, the ricochet physics just pull out the aforementioned no you. Once that third scythe comes into the picture, you need to kill Galleon as fast as the game allows it, because they can and will sometimes put you in an unavoidable death trap unless you perform one of the most perfectly timed Descending Darks ever. So I've made up my mind that the white defender is in fact racist. If you can't tell for legal reasons, that's a joke, and now I'm actually going to get into the boss. The camping strategy still works for the most part, but even without that, if you have the common sense to not walk straight into one of his very long arms as he proceeds to throw his feces at you, then you'll still not have too terribly difficult of a time dealing with him. Like his counterpart though, the ricochet physics can just give you a friendly hello as a piece of sugar honey iced tea collides with your chest. The Sole Tyrant is honestly really mixed for me at the moment. It only took 2 tries the first time, yet when I did the recording for this video, I have no clue why, but he took me roughly 6 to 8 tries. His teleportation as he tries to find the plunger since his toilet is clogged is super obnoxious because half the time he'll be on one side of the arena, and by the time you actually get over there, he'll teleport back where you were prior to trying to catch up to him. His second phase still remains mostly the same, but the location of the homing Dragon Balls, and when they spawn, can and will be the bane of your existence because they require your attention at all times. This man has got some energy in him because there's basically no time in this fight when he's not jumping around like a lunatic or swinging that hammer of his down into the ground. Honestly, his first phase is probably the hardest since you have little to no soul unless you dream nailed him when he fell down, meaning your only option is to try and get near him. The falling rocks can make this fight pretty RNG heavy due to their random fall patterns, but once you knock him down at least once, you can finally collect some souls safely, and before he starts jamming out, you can get in a lot of quick hits. And then just spam Shade Soul and sometimes knock him down before he can even stop rocking out. The RNG of the rocks and his sheer speed and range make him pretty tough during that first phase though, so he's a bit higher than the bosses prior. Hornet's second fight is pretty much like her first fight, because sometimes she'll decide to jump into the air but then do nothing, and other times she'll actually fly towards you. There's the occasional time where instead of doing either of those things, she'll also use her cooking knowledge once more and slap you with her spaghetti strands. When she starts spawning in the pufferfish balls of death, you can easily get rid of them by just using Descending Dark. I found Heavy Blow to be super useful in this fight because you can nearly stagger him every 10 seconds with Quick Strike, which aids in your downtime of being able to swat any balloons that might decide to bump into you. And speaking of which, Defender's Crest aids in that once again. He's only a threat when he jumps into the air because all his other moves are very well telegraphed. The Triple Trouble is back and mostly remains the same. However, due to their increased HP and Radiant, the fight with 3 on the field does take longer, making it more dangerous overall. The fight will still feel like it's going relatively quickly though, since even with all 3 at once, there are many clear opportunities to sink in some damage before having to dodge. The toned down Watcher Knights got a pretty big lift from last time, and that's because Oromado's aggression between attacking you individually leaves very few opportunities to actually hit them, without the other leaping towards you to smack you with that nail of theirs. The most dangerous part of the fight when they are ganging up on you is when one is charging up a nail art while the other is still going berserk trying to smack the devil out of ya. Once you kill one though, as long as you don't get cocky, you'll be in the clear. Yoda is one of the ultimate tests of your patience because you can really only strike him after every brief pause when he stops. His second phase is also a lot more dangerous, since if he launches himself in a way you didn't anticipate, he's still going to let it rip and send you back to the poor pathetic land you came from. Just pick your hits per pause and focus on dodging all his attacks and you'll eventually best Yoda once more. Nightmare King Grim got lowered down a bit thanks to his fight being a lot more fair than the fights to come. It will take some practice to get used to the dodging rhythm, but once you do, Radiant NKG might be shorter than some of your other Radiant fights. The attack that screws me over most of the time is his uppercut, because he'll decide time to die because I'm over in a corner from an attack he used prior to using this move, and I can only Shadow Dash through him or Descending Dark and hope the invincibility lasts long enough. NKG still isn't even a really easy boss to begin with, so this one can probably vary. The Watcher Knights are superbly annoying in Radiant mode because their attacks are almost always overlapping, which means you have to essentially try and figure out a way to dodge 2 moves at once. The easiest way to go about this fight is by going with a Soul Gathering Charm or Charms, and then get prepared to spam Shade Souls and Descending Dark the entire fight. Or if you think you've gotten used to the fight like me, you can just go with Sharp Shadow and deal with them by dodging it all manually. I found it best to focus one until it dies because then you have the downtime to only deal with one of them. The Pure Vessel also moved down, but is now higher than NKG thanks to his attacks being more RNG based. In particular, his parry. He'll occasionally decide to throw this thing out, and you better pray to God you have Shadow Dash if you accidentally hit him. Otherwise, you are dead. Sometimes it looks like he's going to do his lunge attack, but then he spams daggers outwards. And other times he'll teleport basically right above you, giving you a split second to react before he dives onto your skull. Or you try to dodge him and end up running headfirst into a sword coming out of the ground. On top of this, the Pure Vessel is by no means easy to beat normally, and now you need to try and do it hitless. If you went up against Zote 10 times in the vanilla game, then the fight is basically the same as that, albeit you get 1 shot instead of 2 shot, unless you didn't have max health upgrades. His minions also can 1-shot you, which makes them all the more obnoxious. Luckily, they still can be killed in 1 hit. It takes a very keen eye and very high amount of reaction time to actually dodge all of Zote's moves. Trying to figure out what he's trying to do is like trying to do rocket science. Except you know nothing about rockets and you're just really bad at math. He's over here just spamming shockwaves and throwing out feints all the time. And heck, sometimes he'll just run away from you and then just swing around and charge towards you, and then he'll decide to spit his children out into the sky directly where you're trying to jump over him. I found Sharp Shadow to be pretty nice here due to its increased dash range, along with being able to deal damage by dashing through him. It'll probably take you a bit of practice to get used to him, but even then, his RNG can lead to your many fails. This boss has no right to be this high on the list. But on Radiant difficulty, these two become some of the most annoying flying pinballs to fight in the entire game. The only reason they are this high is because may the RNG gods themselves bless you with where and how they are positioned in this arena. Based on that, you're either going to get obliterated by their tears of joy as they watch you disintegrate into nothingness, or it will be really easy to dodge the bullets they shoot out. If Descending Dark was your best friend in some of the fights prior to here, then it is essentially your soulmate in this fight. Especially when they decide to push you into a corner and there isn't a single thing you can do about it outside of spamming that Descending Dark button like your house is about to explode. And for the love of God, trying to hit this guy before he starts violently spewing beads at you is the most obnoxious thing in the world to deal with. If you try to do so right before he decides to use it, then you're going to get sent back to the Hall of Gods, crying internally because, hey look, you have to fight both of them at once again, that's just so fun. They will always spew out the infection in a clockwise rotation, although it is still somewhat randomized depending on which area of their body they decide to start with, and if you hit them while they're facing the opposite direction of you, they turn around to face the direction you are in. Knowing this can make the fight easier and somewhat less RNG based. The Oblobbles have the title of the longest boss for me in Hollow Knight to actually beat. It took me 1 hour to beat the first time, but to be fair, I have learned that I was being too aggressive and now it takes me roughly 10 minutes to beat them consistently. The long-awaited censored version of saying the word BS is here, as Markoth without a floor makes you want to throw your computer out the window, or whatever console you may be using. The only ways you are going to safely get in damage is by going full YOLO and pogoing on him, hitting him with the nail art during his shield spin or when he floats towards you, or just going off into a corner and spamming Shadesel like you know what the heck is going on, but in reality you don't. It doesn't help that the swords can sometimes spawn off screen, and they can also spawn right on your unsuspecting feet as you try to maneuver through the 5 platforms you are given. When he gets his second shield, you are going to want to end the fight, even more so than when Galleon gets his third scythe. Because attempting to hurt him without trading damage or using spells is ridiculous because of how random his flight pattern is. Sometimes he'll decide to float as far away from you as he can, and other times he'll beeline towards you because he's trying to get that nail of yours to put in his collection of about 50 others because of how many times you've died. This is one of the most RNG heavy fights in existence, all because the floor decided it didn't appreciate getting trampled on and just upped and disappeared. The Moth Lamp meme is still the hardest boss on Radiant difficulty. I found it surprising that it only took me 10 minutes to beat Absolute Radiance the first time on Radiant mode, but that's mostly because I got lucky, and the RNG in this fight can be absolutely brutal. While there aren't many times where it's impossible to dodge a move based on another, it can be extremely difficult to actually do so. Her second phase, where basically an entire half of the arena is blocked off, makes it superbly annoying to dodge an attack without accidentally running headfirst into a spike coming out of the ground. Every phase after her third phase features you accidentally jumping off into the void below because you panicked when you saw an attack coming towards you. Her homing balls of light can sometimes be relatively easy to dodge, or they can be ludicrously hard to dodge. And the Pillar of Light, more often than not, covers up one attack she's charging up because the colors blend so well together. Meaning you get hit by an attack you quite literally could not see coming. When she uses the beams of light, you better not be in the air because these come out so fast that you may panic and run straight into one of them, or dodging it inevitably ends in you not paying attention and running straight into the next one. Her fifth phase basically makes you rely on gravity every time you decide to try and move closer to her, and the void follows you upward, meaning if you go too slow, it'll just decide to kill you if it pleases. I found the best way to deal with her to be going a spell-oriented charm loadout, as spamming Abyss Shriek whenever you can lets you actually sink in damage when you need to. Well, there's the Hollow Knight bosses rank 2.0, now featuring getting one-shot, and I think I need to take a mental vacation from the God Home and its challenges now. Instead, what I'm going to go do is take a nap and then come back to Hollow Knight because Unholy God, this game is amazing.